It's become so common that video games, plane simulation video games, are actually including plane jamming and spoofing nowadays in the game itself. Some authorities claim that they have been able to track these signals to cities in Russia. Obviously, Russia has denied this.
Hello, it's Hannah here, and this is What in the World, your podcast for the stories that get people talking from the BBC World Service. Imagine you're on a plane, you're mid-flight, and suddenly it loses its bearings. The pilots can't work out where they are, and they have to find a new way to fly or to land. And they're not alone. Around the world, incidents like this are happening more frequently, and they're being linked to something called GPS jamming or spoofing, which is when those navigation systems are deliberately interfered with. So who's behind it, and should you be worried for your next flight? Here with me in the studio to break this down is BBC journalist Amelia Jansen. Hello, welcome back.
Hello, thank you for having me again.
Amelia, you're from Finland, and there have been quite a few incidents of plane jamming there recently. Is this something that lots of people are talking about?
This is definitely a story that people are aware of. There's been GPS jamming and spoofing in the past, but ever since the war in Ukraine started, there's been a noticeable increase, and it's led to a Finnish airline having to cancel all their flights to a city in Estonia for a month last year because pilots couldn't land safely. And experts now say that every single flight to Finland is affected by GPS disturbance in some way.
What exactly is GPS? How do GPS signals work?
So GPS stands for Global Positioning System. The correct umbrella term is technically GNSS, but we use the word GPS because that's the term most people use around the world. And it's basically loads of satellites that are orbiting around the Earth that are sending signals down to receivers. So it could be a plane, it could be a car, it could be your phone. And through using at least 4 of these satellites, the receiver is then able to triangulate its position on the planet.
But those signals, they can be jammed or spoofed, right?
Correct. So these satellites will send down signals at a certain frequency. And with jamming, for example, someone else will come in with signals at the same frequency, basically blocking and disturbing the signals that are trying to go down to the receiver. So someone likened this to you're in a room having a conversation with someone and a third person enters and starts screaming in your ear. I mean, it would be pretty impossible to kind of continue that conversation because there's so much disturbance around you. So that's essentially what jamming is. Spoofing, on the other hand, is when the receiver does get a signal, but it's an incorrect one, it's a fake one. So for example, it might show an inaccurate timing or an inaccurate location. And I was actually speaking to Ian Pechenik from Flight Radar 24, which is a flight tracking website, and he explained more about this.
There's a specific value that we get from the aircraft while it's transmitting all of the positional information, altitude, heading, etc., called the navigation integrity category. And that allows us to understand how precise the aircraft believes its GPS signal to be. And the magic value is 8. So if that value of the NIC value falls below 8, we can understand that the aircraft is experiencing some sort of GPS interference. The effects that we see on the flight deck are the aircraft saying, I don't necessarily know where I am at the moment via GPS. So I'm going to fall back to other systems on board that I can use to know where I am as an aircraft.
Where else in the world is this happening, and just how common is it?
So jamming and spoofing specifically for flights can happen around war zone areas. So we also see that in the Middle East, for example. We've also seen it around the Black Sea in countries such as Turkey and Bulgaria. And obviously the Baltics and the Nordics have kind of become the new hotspot for this.
Why is that? Why have they become this hotspot?
Well, the authorities think Russia is trying to use this as part of their modern hybrid warfare. They're trying to sow confusion and to make life a bit more tricky for people living near the border. Some authorities claim that they have been able to track these signals to cities in Russia, and that's why they're very confident to say that is Russia. Obviously, Russia has denied this. However, it is apparent that there's been a huge increase in plane jamming and spoofing since the war in Ukraine started. It's become so common that video games, plane simulation video games, are actually including plane jamming and spoofing nowadays in the game itself.
That's really interesting. So it's become part of video gaming too. But in real life, pilots have other systems. They don't just rely on GPS. There are backup systems. So what are the risks of jamming and spoofing?
So there are backups, as you said, and the UK Civil Aviation Authority has told the BBC before that the risks are minimal and people shouldn't worry. However, one of the top Finnish aviation experts has said that this needs to stop because it's just increasing the workload for pilots and air traffic controllers when they should be focusing on their actual tasks at hand. And other authorities are taking note. So the Italian Defence Ministry are thinking of potentially making all their state flights secret, just in case there is any GPS disturbance.
There was quite a high-profile suspected incident of GPS jamming on a flight recently. Actually, it was carrying Ursula von der Leyen, who's the head of the EU. What exactly happened there?
Basically, at the start of the autumn, it was reported that when she was flying to Bulgaria, her plane had experienced GPS jamming, and the pilots apparently had to use actual maps to land. And when that initially happened, when the story broke, the Bulgarian authorities said, yes, it was plane jamming and it was Russia's fault. However, then a few days later, they actually backtracked on that and said, we don't actually know if there was any GPS jamming and it wasn't Russia that was behind it. Russia denied any involvement.
And as you've already said, it's not just planes that use GPS. So what other systems could be affected by jamming and spoofing?
So our whole world essentially runs on GPS signaling. So there are so many sectors. It's, making a phone call, it's taking some cash out of an ATM, the stock exchange, the electrical grid. I mean, there are so many systems that rely on GPS, and countries are noticing this, and they are taking steps to make sure that they can protect themselves in case there is any jamming or spoofing. So just recently, France and the UK announced that they are going to form a partnership where they're going to try and provide critical infrastructure in case anything happens.
And I read that some of the technology that's being used to jam planes is actually quite accessible. So what's being done to stop this?
That's true. There's been cases of occasional accidental plane jamming because someone's been testing out some sort of equipment in their backyard. That can happen. There are a few different steps being taken right now. So, for example, the EU Defence Ministry have said that they are going to deploy additional satellites into orbit, so to hopefully help detect and mitigate any potential GPS disturbance. There's also the fact that airports and airlines just simply have to adapt to this. So, for example, in Finland, all the airports across the country have had to install new infrastructure because so many of them, they could only land planes because of GPS. And now that that's not a given, they've had to install all this new infrastructure. And then there's also the political aspect. So the UN body that's responsible for aviation, they had a big meeting in October where they officially condemned Russia for plane jamming and spoofing.
So for people flying or people who are a bit nervous of flying, should they be worried about this?
I think we have to trust the experts, and the experts are overwhelmingly saying it's okay, pilots are trained for this, they know how to deal with it, there are backup systems in place. It's more that it's annoying for the pilots because ideally they should be focusing on simply flying rather than having to deal with GPS disturbance, especially if it's on every single flight that you're on nowadays. So for the regular passenger, I don't think it's something we need to worry about.
And as a passenger, you might not even know that it's happening. Amelia, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And that is it from us today. But if you like this episode, there is plenty more where this came from right here on the BBC World Service YouTube channel. And while you're here, drop us a comment below. We would love to hear from you. Like, share, subscribe. I'm Hannah. This is What in the World from the BBC World Service. We'll see you next time.